Kynan and Saskia have left Stonebridge and are on their way to Redcrest, the nearest true settlement that could almost be called a city. Between them and their goal lie the Deep Wilds, the firstborn domain, the world before men, and so far the two of them have done their best to avoid straying too deep into that hostile territory, that untamed territory, preferring instead to head on east along the border, the boundary between the Deep Wilds and the coastal region, in an effort to make their way around and minimize the amount of time they have to spend intruding into the deep forest. And for the most part they have succeeded, but they have also acquired an obligation along the way, as they were trespassing in a already occupied, sanctified thicket, whose resident, a outcast from Redcrest by the name of Erin, extracted from them a promise to check up on Asha, her daughter, who still resides in Redcrest, and we also learned that Redcrest is in some kind of trouble, specifically having to do with a pushback by the forces of nature. In terms of progress, we're about halfway there now, so let's see if we can complete the journey. Hey, how are ya? I'm Anderson and this is Kill 10 Reds Plays Ironsworn, episode 2 of the second chapter of Kynan's story. It is once more time to travel, but before we are able to continue, we have two things to take care of. One is Saskia opening up to Kynan about their common enemy, as we define the character that they have in common in a separate video that I will be linking here somewhere. And since we now know who that is and what kind of a person that turned out to be, we need to have Saskia lay this out to Kynan as well. But one other thing, speaking of vows, we have to roll, which I forgot to do last time, getting a little bit too wrapped up in the fiction of the moment, to swear an iron vow to Erin. So the roll, the actual swearing of the vow move, we did not do. We'll do that now, and whatever consequences arise from it, we will weave into the Redcrest storylines. Because it'd be a bit contrived at the moment, having a complication catch up with us between here and there in the middle of nowhere, and at a significant scene moment anyway that we're about to have. So let's swear the iron vow. Well, that would appear to be a miss. Yo! Well, we'll deduct the 2 momentum as we go. That can already be happening now, and we have to envision something that stands in our way. Ask the Oracle of Unsure. What oracle could we ask here? I mean, action and theme kind of stands to reason in a way, but I think also what we could do is either to go with the major plot twist or even another settlement trouble. Let me just screen them quickly. What seems easier to weave in as a complication for a vow to begin. Major plot twist maybe just as a determining factor for why it's not going to be as straightforward as waltzing into Redcrest, asking for somebody by the name of Asha and finding out what's going on. So I envision something in Redcrest that will make that impossible, or at least complicate it in a direction that will not make it as straightforward. So let's do a major plot twist. 60, you are too late. Okay, so we're too late to keep her safe. Something's already happened to Asha. We'll make a note of that for when we arrive in Redcrest. I don't think it'll invalidate the vow, so she'll be unsafe but alive. But maybe not for that much longer, so it might actually make us act, force us to act in ways that are a bit hectic or pressured. So with that out of the way, we now know what our vow will start off as. And that also means we're not able to make progress really before reaching Redcrest and finding out what that is, what we're too late for, then taking it from there. For now, we rejoin Kynan and Saskia as they make camp on the pass along the elevation that overlooks the Deep Wilds, stretching far to the horizon, and from that vantage point between two rocky hilltops that form sort of a natural pathway, somewhat protected from the wind and weather, we have Saskia and Kynan making camp for the evening, setting up their windbreak between like a large boulder and a craggy rock wall, making a fire, digging into the supplies of the deer that they managed to bring down a few days earlier. And it does dawn upon the two of them that they are about to leave this place of almost tranquil, non-committal unreality where they're just moving. They don't have any complications beside what's immediately in front of them. They don't have to deal with what was behind them and what's now in front of them. They're just in that hiking mode almost. But they both realize that this is about to come to an end and that it might be necessary to think about what'll be next. And I think it'll be Kynan who broaches the subject simply by asking Saskia, "Not long now before we get to Redcrest. Got any plans?" Because I think in their current understanding, they're just temporary traveling companions who share a mutual understanding, but also just an ability to keep each other safe, and they happen to have the same destination. But I think in Kynan's mind, and maybe also in Saskia's mind, the way this plays out is to then go their separate ways, because they've made it back to places where there could be mercenary work, there could be other kind of connections and entanglement, and Kynan knows he wants to push further north. Whereas Saskia probably hasn't really even made a plan yet, or perhaps she has, and she's about to spill the beans now. Now I want to ask the Oracle here if Saskia has already made up her mind to either also return north and confront her past, or whether she still leans towards giving it another go and setting herself up for safety by recruiting another bunch of bandits or falling in with the local leader in Redcrest as a sellsword or something. So let's give it a 50 and under for her to return to the north and face her old settlement, and a 51 plus for her making up her mind to keep down in the south and prioritize her own wealth and safety. 44, so she also seems set on the idea of the northern path, maybe also counting on Kynan to go that direction and maybe seeing that as an opportunity to travel in a bit more reliable company. They already know each other, they already know that they're not stabbing each other in the back at the drop of a hat, so as a secondary convenience, wanting to stay traveling companions, but as a primary lesson out of the whole salvager banditry Stone Ridge experience, to just come to that realization that she's run out of room to run. So she'll keep it vague, not knowing what Kynan knows about her past, because he does know a bit from Shona, and she'll simply reply, "I was thinking about going home. Figure you won't be welcome there much." And now that they know each other a bit better, maybe Kynan can see a brief glimpse of surprise that is immediately reset into this scornful, always somewhat amused looking mask that Saskia has adopted for herself the majority of the time. "Oh well, in that case, maybe I shouldn't be returning on my own." "Got anyone in mind? Have business of my own in the north, but not with you and yours." "There are no yours anymore as far as I am concerned, just me for now." "Looks like we share a direction at least. Seems we might travel a while longer." "Seems so." "Got a notion what's awaiting you there? Kazu Patma, wasn't it?" And there's again that flicker of surprise, but this is also almost the entry point for reminiscence as the name of that point of origin from long ago that she hasn't heard spoken probably in a while gets her to talk. And so she lays out that whole story of hers that we established in our world/antagonist building video, and talks of her settlement as one that came into the focus of Vigo of Summer Song, the self-styled unifier of the Ironlands under the destiny that was laid on him by the Pathfinder and by, well, effectively a disciple of the Pathfinder, the holy man that, as long as memory would serve, was already moving from village to village up there in the north, from settlement to settlement, as villages became towns, and towns, even in some cases, became small cities, and who was always a welcome sight in Kazu Patma, as well as the other villagers, as long as the elders could remember, and who had this claim to fame of having come with the first wave of settlers, but also having been old then already, and being able to tell stories of the Pathfinder as he was before there even was a push for the Ironlands, when the original prophecy was made in the old kingdoms that there would come a time of famine, of disease, of war, where the followers of the one that shows the path would find this land of safety. And so you had this wandering figure that was trusted by the settlements, who just happened to be in town as Kazupatma came under siege by the warband of Vigo of Summersong, who wanted to apply a fairly hands-on approach at unification. He's after conquest. He gives the option to join him once, and if the surrender isn't unconditional immediately, he will attack and besiege. And Kazupatma, being one of the first settlements to come under his focus of attention, they were also the first ones to find out how it is to deal with Vigo and what the connection is between Vigo and this holy prophet, this holy man, this former disciple of the Pathfinder. In hindsight, rather, because they do not know this at the time they're besieged, they just have Vigo standing outside the gates and the prophet in white, as Saskia calls him, being in town and having the ear of the local rulership and the local ruling council and the worthwhile citizens. And then Saskia tells a tale of betrayal, where her liege, her guardian, the one that she was sworn to, the leader of her settlement, and whom Shona was also sworn to, had rejected the claim of Vigo and had mustered the troops to resist. And with the storage capacities that they had and the runners they had sent out to allied settlements, it would have been a matter of settling this through warfare that didn't look as grim as to simply throw away the sword. So the commitment to hold out had been made, the siege had been met, storage was full of supplies, a breach wasn't imminent. And then Shona and Saskia managed to stumble into or upon this clandestine meeting that the White Prophet has called with the council without the ruler to convince them of Vigo's destiny, of the futility of resisting the divine claim that Vigo has to unify the Ironlands. And Shona and Saskia, as the observers, the spying intruders on that meeting, also noticing the effect that the prophet's words have, an unnatural effect. He's swaying the council through some force that goes beyond mere words. There is some magic at play. And that's how Kazupatma falls. The council turns on the rulership. There is a last standoff between the loyalists and the ones that are about to open the gates. It goes in the favor of the ones that want to open the gates. And it is understood by both Shona and Saskia that the culprit here clearly is that wandering holy man, who might not be as holy after all. And as Saskia tells this story, Kynan grows more and more somber because he starts to recognize a pattern he's seen before, a pattern that happened to his own band. This figure of the mystic approaching, offering counsel to the leader, only to eventually pull others on his own side and oust the leadership. That's exactly what happened in his old band. That's exactly what happened before Siora died, before the band was lost, and before Kynan somehow found himself stranded at the very southern tip of the Ironlands without much of an idea of how he got on that ship and how he got there. And that description of this old man, this old wanderer, this mystic, fits the bill. The thing is, Kynan doesn't really want to give the game away. Like, he doesn't immediately burst out like, I know that guy, because that's not really how he operates. If he can know that Saskia's enemy is his without Saskia knowing that her enemy is also Kynan, that gives Kynan a bit of a hold over Saskia. So he's not just going to open up and make it known that he suspects that they have an enemy in common, but he's going to file it for future reference. He does, however, want to make sure, so he's gonna have to roll gather information to get her to describe this man a bit better, this prophet. So let's do that. We do share a bond, which means we add +1 to our +wits roll, which makes this a very beneficial result because that is a strong hit with a match. That gives us 2 momentum back. We envision what we learn. We ask the Oracle. We already asked the Oracle in our setup episode, so we don't have to do that now. We learn that this is without a doubt, and that's what I take away as the result of the match, because descriptions are all well and good, but there is something that Saskia drops in her description, maybe a turn of phrase that the Prophet used, that Kaladas always used as well, was fond of using, that removes any shred of lingering, even 99% doubt that this is Kaladas. Kynan is 100% certain that the wandering prophet up there in the north that is aligned with this King Vigo, this self-styled unifier, is indeed the one who co-opted his band, ousted his real leader, took over and led them on a quest that damn near killed all of them. So he knows now. And since he succeeded in the gather information role, he keeps it vague enough so Saskia doesn't know he knows. And so, having learned that up on the mountain pass, Kynan spends an uneasy night, his mind racing on the implications of this and who this Kaladas all of a sudden turned out to be. Because to Kynan up until this point, he was just this perfidious old man who turned, well, into almost a curse for his old band and betrayed them to get a hold of something, some item or some location. But now it's clear that he is involved in much more, and that whatever drove him to use the salvagers, the ruin delvers of Kynan's former past, was just a chip in a much bigger mosaic. And on that note, I think we can undertake the next step of our journey. As the next day dawns and they set off down as the higher ground recedes and they traverse the forest's edge again, and in the morning mist we see where they end up. Well, lost is where they end up apparently, because that is a miss. We are waylaid by a perilous event, pay the price. I was already wondering when this was gonna happen. This has gone a bit too smooth lately. So finally we get lost. Let's roll on the pay the price table and see what we get. 77, a surprising development complicates your quest. Okay, what complication could it be? Let's go action theme. 43, explore. 95, warning. Explore warning. Our quest currently is to find Asha and keep her safe in a town that is beset by the forces of nature. So I'm going to read it in that way. Let's get ourselves a location to see where this warning is that we're gonna explore. 95, it's in the woods. It's in the woods. Yeah, well, that doesn't tell me much. Let me try that again. 02, a ruin. Which gives us what exactly? Let's get a location descriptor and see if that helps. 47, mystical. A mystical ruin. Let's make a note of this here, that this is where we find a mystical ruin. What does it give me, a mystical ruin? First off, it gives me a question of what kind of ruin is it, because there are a couple of potential sources. Can be Firstborn, can be Ironlander, can be Precursor Civilization. Ironlander, I think, is the least likely because it's in the deep wilds, but I do also picture that these wilds somehow fluctuate, so they reclaim parts of the land. Ironlanders make them recede, so it could well be a first settlement that was eaten by the woods. It's just not very likely. And in that light, let's ask, is it an Ironlander ruin? 26 plus says no. 01 says yes. Okay. So we know this is an Ironlander ruin and there is a mystical component to it. How did it become a ruin? Ask the settlement trouble. 97, roll twice. Well, looks like a lot happened here. So what happened first? 52, sickness run amok. And then 80, conflict with Firstborn. Okay, so it's a first Ironlander settlement that was wiped out by the Firstborn after a bout of sickness that was either caused by the Firstborn or weakened them enough for the Firstborn to move on the settlement. The mystical aspect makes me wonder what's mystical about it. The main point of mysticism in the world-building book is magic and the old ways and how that all ties in. But another mystical aspect of the whole setting and setting building, especially in conjunction with the first settlements and the firstborn, are these iron pillars that are warding off the firstborn. So maybe the part that is tied to the mystical nature of this ruin has something to do with the iron. And there's also a sickness component that could be the complicating factor for our quests. That could be the underlying reason why nature is striking back. Maybe nature is sick, and maybe that means that the firstborn wiped the settlement out, but then also kind of cordoned it off almost. So Kynan and Saskia will encounter almost like a biohazard site as dictated by the firstborn. I think I know where I'm going with this now. Kynan and Saskia find out how easy it is to get lost in the deep wilds. They set out in the morning with the mist still hanging in the trees and not rising as quickly as the other days, just obscuring their vision, their long distance vision that is already diminished just due to the density of the forest that they're traveling through, but usually keeping to the edge of the woods and trying to make their way around as much as the encroaching high ground permits. They have so far traveled, with few exceptions like that thicket they ran into, through lighter vegetation, and have, as soon as the trees were getting more and more densely packed, they've backed off and tried to steer closer to the edge. But this now leads them astray, because the settlers that created this as yet unnamed settlement, the ruin that they're about to walk into, also lightened the vegetation, chopped down trees, created paths. And while these are now overgrown again, they're not as densely grown as the pristine forest, so it's something that leads Kynan and Saskia deeper into the woods while they think, especially with the mist around, that they're still hovering near the edge. And before they know it, hours have passed. The mist lifts, and what they see around them is dense trees everywhere to all sides except ahead and to the back, and they realize they're following some kind of ancient old path that has been abandoned and not maintained, which is why it now looks like forest again. And they also realize that they're now much deeper in the wilds than they anticipated or even wanted to be. Now, realizing they're on sort of a path, they will keep following it because they want to know where it leads. That's just the nature of this kind of exploration. They're reluctant to backtrack unless they have a good reason to, and so far it's been uneventful. So they follow this abandoned pathway until they come across signs of old worlder habitation. So before they even reach the settlement core, they come across an old remnant of a wall, a stone wall, the fundament of a homestead that wasn't part of the village proper, but there is nothing left of it anymore. There's just stones that are piled up in a way that doesn't seem entirely random and shaped in a way that makes them look like building material, but the entire area has been reclaimed by the forest. And as they move further and further in along the path, the tree line recedes fairly abruptly and opens up into a clearing that is still mostly open and contains the ruins of what is very clearly an old worlder, early Ironlander settlement, except it is showing every sign of having been abandoned for decades. The palisades that once surrounded it are lying flat, pulled down, overgrown now by moss. A lot of the wood that made up the palisades just gone, the earthen foundation of it broken in many places, with tree roots encroaching and tearing up what was once a man-made structure. Stone constructions like chimneys or foundations are collapsed, crumbling, torn down. The wooden parts have clearly been burned, but seemingly in a controlled way, as the trees surrounding are untouched by the fire, and so are the palisade components. So these houses were burned down individually, not in one spreading fire. And as Kynan's gaze wanders to the center of the village, where he knows in an Ironlander settlement this warding pillar is usually to be found, he sees something that he hasn't really seen before. Because while the pillar is still there, something's been done to it. The pillar, as usual, stands taller than a man. Significantly taller, almost 3-4 meters tall, on a basis of a small elevation, like a small hill, very even. But the usual dull, dark, blackened iron is rusted and corrugated and cracked in places and seeping a substance that looks like black tree sap. And there are vines circling around it, and it is covered in large twisted symbols that are overwriting the carvings that usually adorn these iron pillars in a rust red, certainly blood writing that Kynan identifies as some sort of elven script. The top of the pillar is crowned by an absurdly oversized deer skull with a pair of antlers that are branching out in proportion, in a size that makes Kynan wonder what kind of creature this skull came from, because it was clearly a deer the size of a mammoth. And there are other bones and parts of animal wrapped in this net of vines that is circling around the blood-painted pillar. And it seems that the foundation of the pillar, the small hill that it rests on, this slight piece of even elevation, has been spiked, pierced by long protrusions of what looks to be oversized nails carved from bone that were rammed at an angle into the ground, seemingly converging under the pillar in even spacings. So he imagines some force, the firstborn most likely, preparing these bone spikes and ramming them to, well, it looks like almost sever in some mystical way the pillar's connection to whatever is under it, whatever it draws from ley lines or whatever power permeates. And as Saskia and Kynan uneasily, wordlessly walk closer, they see on the far side of the pillar an open area which seems to be in front of the bigger houses of this former town, facing one side of this pillar hill. The house is no longer standing, but the oval-shaped open space is still there. It is, however, occupied by what at first glance looks to be another hill, but a very jagged one with bits of charred wood protruding from it, and on closer inspection looks like a overgrown remnant of an enormous bonfire that has now been reclaimed by smaller plants growing on it, moss, mushroom. But one thing that is still clear to see in the midst of all that charred wood and reclaimed nature are skulls and femurs and bones of any kind of shape belonging to humans. And the outsides of this bonfire are once again marked with these rust-colored, seemingly blood-painted runes that so far don't seem to have washed off. They're still very clear, and it is eerily quiet. There's no bird song, no rustling. The wind is still. This whole place couldn't be more dead if it tried. And despite the unease, despite the looming threat that just is an undercurrent of this place that screams you are not wanted here to Kynan and Saskia, Kynan is fascinated by this, and he wants to know more of what happened here, just superficially, to see if he can piece something more together. And so while he's still alert and not forgetting himself, he's not lumbering around there in a trance, he does look around. He glances into the ruined buildings through these collapsed, still half-standing charred door frames and piles of rubble and fallen over A-frames of the houses, walking a circle around the iron pillar without going too close, taking a look at that black sap coming out. And so I think I'm gonna gather information, see what he can find out. a strong hit. We gain some momentum and we find out something more of this place. What could we learn? I think we learned that there was a sickness here. Perhaps the first indicator are, what could it be? Deformities on the skulls? I think that's maybe a bit on the nose. I think he finds on some of the door frames and remnants of old entryways and sides of the houses, he finds carvings, marks of the old worlders that are still visible, and also signs that some of these doors had been barred up from the outside, and these markings indicating disease. I wonder if we can find out something more about this disease. So I wonder, was it some kind of biological attack by the firstborn, or was it a disease that happened and the firstborn capitalized on it? Let's do a 50-50, so 50 and below it's a natural occurring phenomenon, and 51 plus the firstborn launched that disease at the people, and that somehow put them in a position where the firstborn could wipe the settlement out. 71, so it was a firstborn made disease. I think here we should face danger to see if Kynan actually comes into contact with that remnant of the disease somehow and runs a risk of, well, becoming infected or at least suffering some kind of consequence from it. Because I think, unlike almost any other creature that intrudes here, Kynan can also cross these wards because he's carrying iron. And so he might blunder into a place that has thus far been untouched and warded off by the runic rituals of the elves, but Kynan is somewhat impervious and can, to his own detriment, get more of a blast from the past here than he bargained for. So let's face danger. And that's a miss and a match. I think I'd like to introduce another plot twist here, just to give us some more material to work with of what exactly happens next, whether it's the illness manifesting or a trap being sprung or something. So let's see what we get. 38, a more dangerous foe is revealed. A more dangerous foe is revealed. So what could we... I think I have something for this. I was actually just going for creepy decorations, but what if the firstborn had left a more immediate security measure in place? So as Kynan crosses into the boundary of the iron pillar, he can't help it. He has never seen a pillar in this state, broken up, seeping black fluid, these bone spikes under there. As he sets foot on the ground that marks the foundation of the pillar, the pierced small elevation, he feels a tingle vibration through his feet all the way up, making his teeth chatter and his sword rattle in its scabbard. And as soon as he grabs the hilt of the sword, the feeling dissipates. His iron hoop that he carries around his neck to swear vows on, becoming warm to the touch as he feels it against his chest. And the wind picks up and the leaves rustle in the trees, and the birds now make their presence felt, but just by exploding away from the trees where they had been silently sitting and fleeing the scene. And the vines that wrap around the pillar start contorting and moving, and an eerie pale blue light flares up in the empty sockets of that humongous deer skull as the bones dangling from the vines start rearranging, and that whole mass of plant life and bone starts detaching itself from the pillar, rising up, forming into a deer skull-topped creature of towering height, wearing the leaves almost like a shroud around its form, but also holding together the pieces of bone that make up its form. Kynan backs up, and Saskia readies herself for battle or flight, looking to Kynan. Is like, what the hell did you do? And that's where we're gonna have to pick it up next time. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.